We got this limitless stuff. It's one of the wearables that records you and everything around you and then kind of transcribes it and lets you clear. The idea is essentially that you kind of keep it on you all the time, and it's like your assistant kind of transcribing everything that happened around you, and then you can kind of summarize it all later.
There's laws about recording somebody without their consent, depending on the state that you live in. There's some not only ethics, but legal ramifications to it.
Well, the opportunity for surveillance of what your devs are doing is way higher than ever before. We have exact tracking of when people code.
So now we're in a position where it's a lot easier to analyze what a software engineer is doing.
Welcome to Tech Council, your go-to podcast for mastering the art of building in the enterprise world. Join hosts Duncan Mapes and Jason Ehmke as they unpack the strategies, tools, and insights you need to drive innovation at scale. Brought to you by DevGrid, we're here to empower developers, tech leaders, and enterprise builders. Hit subscribe, and let's dive into today's episode.
Thanks again for joining us, Jason. Thanks for the time today, buddy. We got a cool topic, or at least an interesting topic for us. It's very timely. We're going to talk a lot about the AI as an engineering team. How should you be approaching it? What are some of the kind of bigger philosophical questions that come as a result of using the AI, and what's ethical, and how do you do it securely, and all that, right? So anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. So how do you, as a engineering leader, how do you balance that? Because things are easier now in some ways, but also much harder in others.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about, let's like frame it up a bit, right? Like this is like our position, I guess I should say. We're using a bunch of different tools within our development environment in DevGrid, right? Like, we'll just play it out there, right? Like, we're using Cursor, we're using the GitHub stuff pretty heavily. We're using Devin, although less. GitHub has kind of stolen the thunder on Devin there. But, we're also using Gemini. Gemini's got some really cool stuff. And then the Claude 4 stuff just dropped last night. We're recording this on the 23rd. And Claude 4 is crazy. I've seen some cool demos of people using that as an agent.
And Codex OpenAI. That was
totally
a big one
too. Yeah, exactly. So we're playing around with all of them, right? And we're seeing kind of variable efficacy, right? Like, what are your thoughts so far?
I love the GitHub integrations. I think that makes it the smoothest, the seamless. Others don't quite have the polish yet. I think some of the models with the others are a bit better, but the polish that GitHub puts in there with just tag the agent, does the work, tags you back in there when it's done. It's very clean. Some of the other models, O3 does a little bit better, I think, in some of the coding, but I think the polish that GitHub puts on it offsets it quite a bit.
We haven't even gotten a chance to play with this yet, but I think I saw it on Twitter last night or this morning or something, and that exact same workflow effectively works with Claude too. So like, there's some extension or something you can add. I got to look into it, but you can just at Claude, and then it'll on a ticket, similar to how you would assign a ticket to the Copilot agent, and it goes and submits the PR for you and all that type of stuff. So the workflows are getting awesome, right? Like the cool thing, the interesting thing for me is if you think about like the different layers that exist, just from like an application architecture standpoint, right? Like, obviously you have the foundational models and their capabilities, right? And your Anthropic and OpenAI and Google are obviously the biggest, most kind of sexy ones at the moment. And, but Grok's coming up fast. And then there's, obviously, some open source ones out there with DeepSeek and Llama and all that type of stuff. But what's interesting is all the products basically have all the models, right? Like, it sounds like I did see some stuff with Claude 4 that maybe Anthropic withheld it from Windsurf now that they got acquired by OpenAI, which, a little gamesmanship, never hurt anybody. It's kind of fun. But, kind of Anthropic and OpenAI and a little blood feud is always entertaining. But for the most part, it's like, yeah, the underlying models are the same. So then you have two other layers where you're saying, okay, the application, essentially the orchestration capabilities, like what additional prompts are you, system prompts and all that type of stuff is being layered in. And then there's the actual, workflow itself, right? And that's where the differentiation starting, right? Is, to your point, like, my perspective is I played around with OpenAI's Codex for like a hot minute, and I decided I don't like this. This is weird. Like, it's cool. Like, the actual work it's doing isn't bad, but the workflow is just so foreign and so special to itself that I was like, I'm not interested. It's not worth it to me.
Well, it's a little bit harder because I had it perform a task, and it did the task very well. I think its execution was better than Copilot. However, where I struggled with it was, well, I need to make a change. And so I'd already had it submit the pull request, submitted its work that it's done. But if I asked for a change in the Codex UI, well, it tried to submit a second pull request, or it just didn't refine it as well as I would have. And it almost completely submitted a whole new pull request versus modifying the existing one, which was a little bit of a cumbersome process to go through. And then sometimes their UI wouldn't be updated that the pull request was merged in. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there to call it a polished and finished product. But I think in the where we are in the world, in the industry, is that you don't get a whole lot of second chances right away. Somebody else is going to come in and they're going to swoop in, just like Copilot did. They launched their agent, and I'm bought in on the agent with them now. It's
kills Devin for
cleaner.
Us, right? Like, we were already a little frustrated with Devin anyways, to be fair, but like once they put that in, and actually even like I saw their video demos before they turned it on for us, and I was literally checking like almost every day, and you actually got to it faster than me, which made me crazy because I've been looking like 30 times probably over the last 2 weeks before they turned that on. And then you looked at it an hour before I did, and you found it and started using it.
Which explains
awesome.
Which explains why Devin didn't have the GitHub integration that you can tag Devin in a pull request, because GitHub was launching their own.
Yeah.
And there's a potential, I think they could have kept Devin out of the mix in favor of their own agent. But, if I can log into GitHub, write up an issue, tag Copilot in there, have it fix a defect or add the enhancement, that is orders of magnitude better than any of the other flows right now. Even if the execution, if I have to go in there and modify a pull request, I would much rather do that. I'd much rather have it do most of the work, go in, clean it up myself, refine it, push again, than have to go into 2 or 3 UIs to make it work.
It's not even close, right? Like it's so like that was sort of my point before. Like the models, everybody has the same models. The middle layer, there's a little bit there. I think Cursor's probably doing some magic there better than anybody, right? At that middle layer. But then the top layer, kind of the experience layer and the workflow layer is where the differentiation can happen, right? And so I think and that's a distribution thing too, right? Like GitHub is the biggest player in source control, right? Like they are the 900-pound. They're all 3 900-pound gorillas. Like GitHub's there, or GitLab's there, and Bitbucket's there, and Harness is trying to get in that game, and there's a couple others, and you can obviously self-host Git, but I mean overwhelmingly it's GitHub. And so if you can stay in that workflow, I mean it's super powerful.
Well, we've noticed it a little bit with, you mentioned the layer of the system prompts, and we'll have Gemini come in and review a pull request. However, I think that's where they are excelling is in isolation, Gemini reviewing your pull request. We're getting much better results with Gemini reviewing things. It gives better suggestions, more detailed suggestions.
It's meaner too. Like in a good,
it is, but I appreciate that. But it's little more pedantic. Yeah,
it's a little bit more like, what are you doing? Like,
but it also find things that aren't necessarily in your pull request, but things that you need to do. But I really appreciate it puts the criticality on it. This is critical, high, medium. Now, sometimes it's a little off, but regardless, Copilot could say there's no issues, but Gemini says there's 5. And they're maybe a little bit more nitpicky, but they're not wrong either. They're things that should be fixed.
And context matters, right? Like, and obviously we've got some stuff with DevGrid that we'll talk about later, but not today, but another day, in terms of context and stuff. But like even just something that happened the other day, I was using the agent to write something, and in the process, it logged out an account ID, right? And so when the pull request went through and scanned everything, obviously that kicked off like a security scan that then said, hey, you probably there's a privacy issue here because you're logging an account ID. And then the agent responded to that and was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, let me go fix that right away. Now, in this case, it was actually wrong. Like that account ID is not sensitive data. It's an internal ID that we use. So it's fine. And it's good that it's there. But it was interesting to see it can take that additional context, right? And so how, that I think is going to be part of the bigger game. And, how do we get the right context to these agents as they're doing the work. Whether it's asynchronously, like we're talking about with the pull request stuff, or the kind of developer assistance where they're doing it, in IDE. It's that context is everything.
It's and even the instructions that you give to the agent, just all things being equal, the models are the equal. We all can see that you give GPT, you are a developer, or you are a systems architect, you are a product owner. You're going to get vastly different responses. So now, if you're using the same model, but you have agents in a different quote unquote mode, now being able to bounce those agents together, in our workflow, it would be Gemini doing the overly critical pull request, and Copilot would be the execution of there. I think that workflow, if we can get that all worked in together and wired up, huge success, huge wins, because it doesn't exactly work too well today. Yeah, I actually tested that. I tried to create an issue from some Gemini feedback and assigned it over to Copilot to fix, because it was, I was too busy. It was nitpicky. It was going to take me a while to do, but that flow doesn't exactly work well yet. So Copilot wanted to create a whole new pull request off of the default branch versus fixing in my current branch. So I think there's some seamless integration needs to work.
We'll get there. Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's all happening so fast. I mean, have you even messed with the new Google one? Like, Google dropped their own agent like 3 days ago, and then they're like, or 2 days ago, the website was down when I went there. They're basically like, yeah, we can't accept any new tasks.
It's been Christmas. So, you get all these new toys.
it's it's crazy. I mean, I would say it's a complete waste of time because we just chase all these rabbit holes. But the cool thing is, like, real work gets done. I pulled you. Of course, I wasted a bunch of your time because I was so excited about it. Like, I see this workflow happening, like, in our SaaS business, right? Something comes in, there's an operational need. We have to do something. Maybe we go trigger something in a flow, or drop an event in a queue, or fix a dead letter queue or something, whatever it is. And we do it manually today because, it's not something that happens enough that it really matters. And then I'm kind of doing the thing, and I'm like, and you have the thought, man, I really should sit down and code out, XYZ solution so that I don't have to go do the thing that I'm doing that's a little sketch. And then it's like, okay, well, now the next step in that workflow, instead of having that anxiety about, I just added another thing to the back of my mind. It's like, all right, I'm going to have discipline. I'm going to take 30 seconds. I'm going to write out the ticket in GitHub. What is it that I would need to do? So I can like drop it from my mind, or, give it to somebody else to do. Blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, oh, well, why don't I just put Copilot on it? Because that would be interesting. And then I go back to my work. I finish up the thing I'm doing. I make sure it's working, all that type of stuff, however long that takes, 5-10 minutes. And then by that point, I've got a pull request in my inbox or on my Slack or whatever saying, hey, look at the thing that they did. And it's like, boom, it's 95% of what I needed. I got to tweak a couple variable names and all that type of stuff. And it's like, great. Now I never have to go and do the hacky thing again. I have a workflow that's controlled, that's source controlled, all these different things. It's smooth. I'm super pumped, right? Like, so things like that, the important but not urgent work, it gets so much easier to get done, right? Because you know exactly what it is that needs to happen, right? Like, it's not necessarily hard, but it could be hard, but it's easy to define, especially operational things like that, where it's like, hey, I go move from data from here to here to here to here to here to here. Like, I do all these different things. Go streamline that so that I could kick it off in a clean way, and not like running in and manually invoking a Lambda or something like that.
Well, I think nice. It goes even further than that, because think about the world where you would be debating a task for an hour. Should we do this task? Or should we not do this task? It's going to take so long to do this task.
Never done that. That never happened.
Well, everybody does, because previously it would take you days to get something done. Like, oh, well, I need to, the recent discussion that we had was create a new CloudFormation stack and, push this new Lambda in, and all that time it's going to take to do that work. We could do something else. The world we live in now is just do the thing. Yeah. The debate about doing the thing is actually going to be the one that takes you longer than just doing it and just getting it off your plate. You don't have to debate anymore. You can just go.
Well, and it kind of back to it's not really an ethical question, but kind of a strategic one, right? Like, the effort involved is less important than the making the right decisions, right? And so
Yes.
now, this is where a lot of people say, hey, like you basically everybody just needs to become an architect, which I don't fully agree with, but I think there's some truth to, right? There's thinking through, okay, what's the right way to do this? What are the implications, blah, blah, blah. Because then you can instruct the tool to go do it, especially when it's stuff like that where it's structural, just get something set up. It's not like a lot of coding logic. It's more operational and kind of what's the right flow and all those types of things. That it's really cool. I'm having fun with it, and obviously it's empowering for us because instead of having obviously the code assist aspects of Cursor and those tools. I loved Copilot until you got me out of my small little box and got me to try Cursor. Cursor was obviously way better. My guess is Copilot, like in the IDE, is catching up rapidly. I haven't really used it since they launched agent mode and things like that. I suspect it'll be one of those things where Cursor's always like 20% better and GitHub will just kind of come behind. But at least until they either run out of money or get bought or something. But that how the business cycle of all the AI tools works out is going to be really interesting. But for sure, there's value there. Like it's the one place where the AI stuff is super, super, super obviously valuable. So
yeah, I mean, it's not going to take up the should we even do this? That should we do this is still just as important. The sequencing of things is just as important, but the debate on when we should do this, that becomes a lot less because, as I saw yesterday, we had a debate about how we should split up our stacks to run database migrations and, enhance some workflows there. But the debate that we had was longer and I already have the majority of it done already. And it took me 5 minutes, but the debate was 30 minutes. And so, it's hard to break that cycle of when should we do this? Because it's becoming much easier. The barrier of entry is so much lower now.
Yeah. If you can get some clarity of thought, then that's the thing. Actually, that reminds me, there's this other thing I realized this week that I think was a super interesting thing to me. Probably, I don't know if anybody else thinks it's interesting, but one of the things I realized that there's a cognitive tax when like doing a code review for a person is, it's not that it's hard, but like, if you think about like the way I process information, at least, and maybe I'm unique, but I suspect this is mostly true for most people, right? Like you analyze something and you have your initial reaction of wrong, this is wrong, this should be da da da, and then you're like, okay, cool. Well, that's not how you talk to other humans. So like, what's the right? And of course, you see this with juniors, they don't know how to do that, and they piss everybody off, and you get the engineers are jerks because they just don't know how to translate into that initial assessment. But you take that initial assessment and then you have to layer in, who am I talking to? Okay, what's their status? How senior are they? Do they understand this code base? Like, how long have they been around? Like, you got to factor all that in, and then you give a message that's very tailored to that person generally, and that's hopefully trying to be as productive and as possible, right? Like to help them get better and get the right outcome and have a good discussion. When you're dealing with the agents, you don't have to do any of that, right? Like you're back to just pure clarity. Like you can prioritize, completely optimize for clarity. So, and I didn't realize how much time and energy is actually consumed in the other bit, right? Like doing a 500 line code review for an agent versus doing it for like a human or like one of our devs is probably I would say a quarter to half the time and effort, because it's just like bam, 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 as opposed to, okay, how's Jimmy thinking about this? Let me think about the right way to say that to them and all this different stuff, which again is fine. Like it's not a bad thing that's there, and mentoring and helping those guys grow is an important part of it. And it's like actually one of the best parts about running these types of companies and having, running those types of teams. But I just thought it was super interesting, right? Like you don't have to think about it.
Well, I'd say on the receiving end of that as well. If you were to critique my code review, for example, and let's just play out that scenario a little bit and be hyper short with your critiques, and I wouldn't, but somebody in my shoes might get offended by that.
Yeah.
They might feel burned out. I've seen it 100 times where developer A means well. They have the best intentions. They're a good developer. The other developer just, they're they need the message in a very soft way, but they butt heads, and they can't work together because they don't speak the same language. But
Man,
on the receiving end of like Gemini is, like we said already, is rough. But when you receive it, you know, hey, this is just a machine.
Yeah.
It's just it's not personal. This is just how it was programmed. So receiving those even rough messages, it's like, oh, okay, well, could it have been delivered better? Sure. Maybe the developer needs to just update their prompt, but you know, it's meaning to give you very specific, actionable information about the pull request, and there's not any personal opinions involved.
That's a really good point. That's a super good point, right? Like, it's the exact same harsh message comes from a machine. You know, the machine is trying to help you, so it doesn't bother you. You get it from one of your peers, and it bothers you, right?
Well, you think, well, what's their motivation? Like, what are they trying to do? Is this just what they like? Yes,
they're putting you down in the hierarchy of all the things, and the totem pole and all that type of stuff. But there's, you know, the bot, at least today, doesn't exist in the hierarchy. It's a separate thing, right? So that's actually really, I didn't think about it that way. That's really cool. It was funny as you were saying that. I'm thinking about a story, like, and you know this guy, I won't say his name, but he worked for me at B of A, and he came over to Passport as well. And he was a nice guy, but he was an odd dude. And you know, like, people would say spectrum, you know, for sure, on the spectrum for sure. And just very, very deliberate communicator, but like, it's like you were talking to Gemini, right? Like, there was a harshness, and he wasn't ever mean or rude. It was just like unbelievably to the point in a way that made people uncomfortable. And I had a guy on my team at B of A who was a Java guy and was from India. Like, he had just moved over, like, on an H-1B he was on part of Bank of America's India team, and then he came to the US, and his English was, you know, passable, but it wasn't great, right? And so these guys, they would get into it on their code reviews. Like, they would, I swear to God, like, I thought they were going to get into blows, like, because you know, my JavaScript, you know, ninja guy who's, you know, not great with humans, and this Indian guy who had just come to the States and is trying to, like, make his place, and, you know, like, this guy's just pointing out every little thing that the guy got wrong, and a lot of it was like little kind of English syntax and naming conventions and all this different stuff, and it made him crazy. It made him absolutely crazy. And I remember having to, like, coach both of them through that. And, you know, I mean, that's just normal stuff you deal with in an engineering shop. Like, it's just humans interacting with humans creates weird interactions. But, you know, obviously you try to help the guy who's being a little harsh or a little, you know, making people uncomfortable to not do that. In his case, there was no help in it. That's just who he was. And there was no malice. It was just, you know, he's asked to review the code. He's going to tell you everything wrong. But helping the other guy realize, hey, this is actually a really positive thing for you. Like, having someone who cares and is willing to tease apart and actually identify with clarity every little problem in your code and in your language is actually a really good thing. And if you can wrap your head around that, you'll actually appreciate it one day. I think he got there eventually, but I also think he was pretty happy when that guy left the team to come to Passport.
Well, you bring a good point to it, though. You know, we've mentioned before about how personal skills, how, you know, your ability to work with others, and your communication style in the future where software engineering is going to be so much more important. So, but as we're seeing as well with some of these coding agents, you can just be raw and unfiltered, and those people who might not work well with others can actually be more successful in teams where, you know, they can have either their messaging reviewed, or they know that, hey, I can be a little harsh. How do I rephrase this? And they can rephrase their messaging.
Well, use the AI
in a way.
Like, how many times have we taken an email and said, hey, say this more professionally, or say this kinder, or
that's something I struggle with too sometimes. I don't know exactly how to tailor something, so I throw something into the chatbot and try to refine my message to sound better. But also, you know, in these code reviews where they might struggle, or an agent, they can work more one-on-one with the agent and be their pair programmer, so that, because the agent has no personal stake in it, they can take the beating. and they're not going to take anything personally and refuse to work with this person, so that person can actually be quite successful working with an agent versus working with a pair programmer.
No, it's fascinating what's happening. It's all and it's not. I wouldn't say it's like changing every week, but there's
it certainly seems that way.
There's new developments every week that kind of like it's like we're like whitewater rafting, right? Like we're screaming down the river, and there's bends and curves and rocks and all this stuff that's just like bouncing you in a different angle each time. And so but I mean, obviously the momentum is still going in one direction, which is, I mean, it's all great. I think it's all positive for the industry. I think it's positive for engineers. I don't believe the doomerism that it's going to destroy all these jobs. I mean, I think it will on the short term probably cause a contraction of some sorts. And you're already seeing that, right? You've seen layoffs, you're seeing slower to hire type stuff. But I think as you know, like again, like the kind of the obvious example is, you know, when cars came out, they sold less immediately. They sold less, horse-drawn buggies, right? And so, but in the end, it translated into more drivers than there ever were. So it's less. I think software engineering will evolve, obviously, but I think it's a net positive in the long run for everybody. And so, and I think there'll be more people writing code. I mean, 2025. I mean, what was it? Something like 24 million accounts on GitHub. I bet you 5 years from now that number's 50% higher, if not double.
Well, if the people before that were, to your analogy, those who were making the horse-drawn carriages before, well, they make the next thing. They're, as long as they are in the mindset of I make things, you could make things anywhere. You know, I'm a software engineer. Just because you don't work at a large industry anymore, well, there's going to be more startups who are spawning out who need people.
You can do your own startup a lot easier.
You can do your own. So there's so much more opportunity for those who look that way versus, yeah, sure, some people at big companies are going to lose their job. No sugarcoating it there. But now all these other little AI startups, case in point, there's some of these little wearables that people are wearing now there's a lot more opportunity there.
Yeah.
But
so that was a hell of a segue.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's all these little startups are coming in, and there's opportunity there for anybody. I bought the Limitless pendant.
Yeah.
The purpose of it was for the meetings.
Yeah. So we're about to go to a trade show, right? It's going to be our first trade show. We're excited. And we got this Limitless stuff, right? Like these, and for those of you who don't know, it's not like a paid promo or anything. I haven't even really set it up yet, but we're just playing around with this. One of the wearables that records you and everything around you, and then kind of transcribes it and lets you query it and all those different things, right? And so the idea is essentially that you kind of keep it on you all the time, and it's like your assistant kind of transcribing everything that happened around you, and then you can kind of summarize it all later. Which if you think about for a trade show, super awesome, right? You're constantly talking to people are introducing themselves. They tell me their name 2 seconds later, it's gone from my brain, like all that type of stuff. And so there's a lot of benefit to it, but the ethics of it, right? Like we get into like, okay, wow, how do we like this? But my wife walked in, she's like, what is this thing? And she's like, and I told her, I was like, if you start recording me without telling me, I will punch you into the sun, or whatever she said. I believe she would immediately. She absolutely would do that. Like saw like, oh, you're gonna like record a conversation so you can play it back later and talk about how right you were or something like that. That was her assumption of what I would do. Which, I mean, to be fair,
you would totally do that too.
But so that's but it's like, what do we do, right? Like, and so it's like one of those things that is, as a technologist, I think is super cool. As someone who thinks about like forces in the world and what's fair to other people and all those different things. It's really complicated, right? And so
there's laws about that too. There's laws about recording somebody without their consent, depending on the state that you live in. It's either I have given permission to record my conversations, that's enough. But in certain states, both people have to opt into being recorded. So there's some not only ethics but legal ramifications to it.
Yeah, for sure. So I think for us, like, we haven't fully figured this out, but like, we're going to a trade show, so we'll have lanyards on. Like, my expectation is we'll pin it on the lanyard and probably put a little card on it that says like, hey, I'm recording. If you don't want me to record, just let me know. I'll turn it off. Right. Like that's, and then obviously can say that or whatever, figure out if that's super awkward and people start getting turned off by it, we'll just get rid of them. But it's an interesting thing as the tech gets more and more powerful. I'm reminded of the old, what was it, Jurassic Park? The scientist guy was like, you're so obsessed with whether or not you could, you never stop to think of whether or not you should, right? And I think, obviously people talk about AI alignment and all that type of stuff without tackling that problem at all. I just mean in terms of some of these implications of some of these tools, right? We go back to the coding tools you're talking about, right? Like the opportunity, for example, the opportunity for surveillance of what your devs are doing is way higher than ever before, right? Like I was part of a team. My team built an internal, what effectively is like what Kersher is doing, but internal to a corporation a couple of years ago. And one of the things that was really, 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 really interesting that we kind of backed into by accident was, shoot, we have exact tracking of when people are coding, because we know Jason is getting these code suggestions at this frequency in this time frame, because we have the timestamps on every code suggestion we sent to him in his IDE. And so that's how we know he was actually coding at that time. And you realize, and like when we looked at that data, I was like, we can't share this data to anybody because I was like, we can't show this to the senior leadership. That will just fire an enormous number of people, because they realized like how few minutes a day people were actually coding, right? And so it was crazy, interesting. Like, what do we do with that?
We look at a lot of other roles, though. Just going to pick the most obvious one to me: sales. A salesperson, every single thing that they do is trackable. Salespeople have GPS tracking for when they go on their routes, so where they have been, where they're going, who are they visiting today, what accounts are they visiting today. They have their calls analyzed and recorded. They have how many calls, how many dials you're making, how many people you're connecting to. But, most importantly, how much revenue are you generating? But that's one very, very specific role that has everything analyzed down to the words that you're using to a prospect. You'll have coaching with your manager
that to a whole nother level.
Sure.
Right?
But even before
sales
that,
was already there. Sales was already capturing all that data, but now the analysis that AI can do is crazy.
Well, that role was very comfortable with that. If you're going to be successful, there's people who weren't comfortable with it; they're not successful. But those people who were successful were always analyzing their calls. What am I saying? At what point did I jump in on the conversation? Did I interrupt? Did I do this? Did I do this? And they're crazy successful at their job, and they're probably leading big teams now, or just being crazy successful as a salesperson. But that's one role that has already been under the spotlight of what are you doing, when are you doing it, and how much are you doing it. So now on the other end of the spectrum, software engineers have been kind of babied a little bit of they're not being analyzed, and just leave me alone, I'm coding. You should just trust me that I'm coding. And so now we're in a position where it's a lot easier to analyze what a software engineer is doing. And depending on the intention of it, sort of, yeah. But depending on the intention, you could really get into what are you actually doing? To your point, you're getting suggestions on here. Okay, that's an indication that somebody is either in meetings all day, somebody who is getting pulled or doing code reviews somewhere else. But it's indication that it should be investigated further is kind of where we're getting now.
No, it's a really good point. I think, it's one of the philosophical underpinnings of DevGrid, right? Like we even say it, right? Like we draw inspiration for our kind of NGOps philosophy from the RevOps thing, which is essentially the practice that created exactly what you're talking about. The revenue operations, they said, okay, we're going to create a unified data. We're going to bring it all together. We're going to analyze the living daylights out of it. And we're going to find every little inefficiency. We're going to make that revenue stream as high performant as possible. We're going to make sure everybody stays on top of their, they got the right number of dials happening, that, to your point, all those individual things, all those individual optimizations that add up to big optimizations. And so, and we realized, part of the origin story of DevGrid is looking at it as like, hey, we've got all these really cool tools. They don't talk to each other, and they may talk to each other like Jira and GitHub. You can integrate them together, and like you can associate them and things like that. There's some of that, but they don't kind of get into a common language. They don't kind of get into a common data model and things like that, and where you can really do great analysis against it. And that's kind of why we built what we built, because we do think the challenge. There's a few things, right? Sales, the outcome is so much more obvious and easy to measure, right? Like you could basically measure a sales team based on like 2 KPIs or 2 or 3 KPIs, right? You can be like total new customers, total revenue booked, and then like some quality control metrics, things like, did you, deal size or churn and, things like that, like to make sure that you're not just booking crap, right? So but basically you get the business outcome. Or like, are they selling stuff? Like, are they getting new business? Like that's the outcome. It's really obvious. With engineering, it's not as obvious, right? Because you could ship a ton of code.
It's not as easy to be obvious. I'd say it can be. It's not as easy to be depending on the size of the team in an organization. Solo dev, super easy, but larger you get, the harder and harder it gets to know, because you could measure by defect rate. You could measure by successful releases. You could be measuring by, throughput. You can, but the bigger you are, it's significantly harder to measure any one single developer's effectiveness.
Totally, right? Because the direct impact on business outcomes is so abstracted. And so then you have to then try to get a bunch of proxies and then you have to define what's good for you, and also like what's good in a company like DevGrid versus a company like Bank of America or something like that. They're very different outcomes they're looking for, right? And so you have to be able to tailor that, and that's the other thing. Or sales, like it doesn't really change from company to company. It's like book the sale, right? Versus engineering, like you got to look at the life cycle of your applications. You got to look at the life cycle of the business. Like there's all these different things that change, what you care about. If you're in a, seed stage startup, all you really care about is getting shit out the door, right? Like that's all that matters as an engineer. But if you're at Bank of America, like when I used to run DevOps and platforms for digital at Bank of America, my boss, who was a great guy, but he was like one of the more sort of buttoned up people I've ever worked with. And like every conversation around strategy was all the way up the chain. There was 2 goals that mattered. Everything else was just, that's fine, cool. That's something you can put on your resume. You did this really cool thing. Don't go down and don't get hacked. Like that's it. Like that's all that matters in a place like that, right? Everything like that's problem 1 through 99. Maybe there's a 100 that's like, oh yeah, cool. There's some one little optimization we did. As long as it causes 0 risk to do that optimization, you can go do it. But that's again, there's nothing wrong with that. It used to really drive me crazy. Like I hated it because I just wanted to change everything. We were all like heavy VM, JVM nonsense. And it drove me crazy. I wanted to containerize and then use serverless, and of course, no one was even remotely interested in that. But and I used to resent it and was really frustrated by it until I realized, oh no, it's incentives, right? Like that company is at this stage where the risk of failure of any kind is too high, and so everything is about risk optimization. Versus again, back to an early stage startup, if you go down for 10 minutes, people might not even notice, right? And so it's just a different animal. You got to be able to bake that into your skills or into your kind of evaluation.
You mentioned something about incentives, right? But there's multiple layers of that. And so when we're getting into this more easily surveillance, the agents, able to analyze data, you're back to this thing for a second, recording. I wear it myself, and it clues me in things that maybe like I probably could have phrased that a little bit better because it gives me those insights every day. And so yes, you could look at it as a way of I'm being surveilled, I'm being watched, I'm being, spotlight on me. Big Brother is there. Which I read that book recently, by the way. Wow, that was quite the read. So I recommend if you haven't, it's a good time to pick up the 1984. But regardless of that,
time, it's always a good time to read 1984.
Always, but to the individual, my advice to them would be, look, you could look at it as a way of Big Brother's watching you. Because, yeah, that's right. But the benefit to you as a human, as a developer, as an employee is that this is going to help you get better. This is going to help you find your blind spots. It's going to help you, yes, ship more, but also if you're not shipping more now, what to you is holding you back from that? Is it, working through problems? Is it architecture? Is it problem solving? Is it, communicating with your product owner of what the expected outcome is? What is it? These tools will help you uncover those weak spots, the blind spots, so that you can get better. Yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable. Doing this podcast, as I've said before, to me was was uncomfortable, but it's embracing that and getting in that spotlight and embracing it versus fighting back against it is going to help everybody get better, because it's going to help you find where you're maybe not doing the best. And we all have those points where we can get better.
Yeah. It depends. I completely agree with that. Right. And it also context matters, right? Like if you're at a job and you're being, and people are trying to, they're analyzing your workflow to look for opportunities for improvement. I think that's fair game, right? Like I played sports coming up, like we would watch film, like it would grade every step you take.
But you had
right?
to.
Like,
but you had to.
You can't be great if you're not going to be critical, right?
Right.
And like the only place we've allowed criticality, I don't know. The only place we really kind of said, okay, it's okay to be critical is in a code review, right? Like any other time, it's like it's somehow we've, how do I say it? We've psychological safetied it away, basically, right? And so, which I get why we do that, and I'm not completely criticizing that, but it is an unfortunate byproduct where really there's a lot of different ways to do things too, right? Not everybody has the exact same workflow. Not everybody should be expected to work exactly the same. But to your point, if we could do the film review style, break apart what you're doing and then give you that feedback and then measure it like that. Yeah. There's value there. It's not like, the AI stuff makes that type of stuff scary, right? Like one of the stories I always think about, not stories, but like scenarios I always think about is like I love London. London is like one of my favorite cities in the world. Lived there for a little while in college and had, close friends and family that lived there. And you spend a lot of time there. And one of the interesting things about London is that it is covered in cameras. Like you basically walk outside anywhere in the city, you're on a government owned, controlled, streamed back to their discs camera. Now that wasn't that scary, and that was, I think they did that in the 90s or 80s, 90s because of all the IRA bombings and things like that. Is when that kind of came up, and that wasn't that scary then. 2004, 2005, 2006 when I was there, because it's like, okay, it only gets really used if a crime happens. Like there's so much video, right? Like it's just whatever. There's probably like 100,000 cameras. You think about like the millions of terabytes of data that's being created, right? Like they only pull stuff up and they do interesting stuff, right? Like you saw, this was in the movie. It was in the movie about the bombing in Boston at the marathon. They had it there, but then also definitely they did it in those two bombings. I think it was 2007. They were able to figure out the guys that did it from the cameras in the underground, like where they put the things in the trash cans or wherever they did, and they were able to retrace their steps basically back to their house. Like they essentially saw the guy. It wasn't quite where they like watched him walk out the door, but it was basically that. Like they were basically able to narrow it down to a street block where the person originated from, and then when they went into that building the night before, and it's like they just showed up at their house, right? So, which I'm glad that type of thing exists if somebody blows up a underground, right? But but that takes an enormous amount of resources to do that, and so it only gets done when it's really necessary. Well, now, right?
It's a lot easier now. You can run it through your model.
For everybody, right? Now they can
every camera.
Say, okay, I know where Duncan is, but I'm gonna create a metadata trail of where Duncan's been, and then I'm gonna layer all the trails of all the different people that he might have come in contact with, and I'm gonna look at and I'm gonna create profiles of them from their social media and da 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 da. And then all of a sudden, when the revolution comes, I know exactly who to go grab off the street when I want to. Now that's a little.
Well,
bit
to be fair, a lot of the data's been already there with your carrying around a GPS in your pocket all day. Totally.
But again, to my point, like the layering it all in and like enriching it and who was close by and all those different things is, it's a little like, okay, I'm not really sure I'm cool with that. Right. So I get the instinct. I get the reaction. There are real challenges and risks there, but at the same time, also, you can't really put the ketchup back in the bottle. Like it's out, and it's going to be interesting. Like, we're both in our 40s. Like our kids are going to have a different world to deal with some of these things. And, how we think about, you can't really be an anarchist and try to blow up all the data centers and stuff like that and try and stop this, because it's not going to stop. And so the question is, how do you behave responsibly and also in a way that, hopefully helps the world be better as you go forward, right?
Well, that's the crux of it, right? Is that, a lot of these tools wouldn't exist in the way if there wasn't a driver to create surveillance. So hypothetically, if we knew that all software engineers were working 8 hours a day, nonstop, everything was perfect, they wouldn't exist. Now, that's a little bit hyperbolic there. However, that's just not reality. And so,
how many times have you had to fire people because you found out they had multiple jobs?
Multiples. Multiple times you had to fire somebody because they were working 2 jobs, or, you ping them at 9 o'clock in the morning when they're usually on, and they don't get back to you until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's not real. So, in certain cases that's part of the driver why organizations want to surveil the individuals, because it's the bad apples that ruin the batch. But, that's the reality. It's not great to hear. It's not great to say, but that's the reality, is that it's the bad apples who ruin it for the bunch. And that's why these tools exist, is because, an organization has to be making sure that they're efficient. They can't be paying somebody to have another job just to fill a seat.
I mean, what we one person who had actually worked for both of us throughout their time, I think they had 7
jobs. Yes, concurrently? 7.
And the story was wild. Like, we were talking to, I heard this secondhand because they didn't report to me anymore, so I was not in the middle of it. But the investigations person called the employment verification person at one of those companies, and they were like,
they were a few cubes down.
I can see them right now. You're saying they're drawing paycheck from you, and it was crazy. So it was a pretty, and that's, I wouldn't say it's common, but it's not uncommon either, right? It's happening a lot. And so
there's a few other people that were on my teams that I had to let go because they had multiples, and the only way it was proven is that they had a W-2 from there, and that's how it was caught. But you could tell this person was underperforming by their output.
Well, and I think that's, to your point, right? This is part of why some of this data, and this gets back to how do you be a good leader and a good manager, right? Because in some of these big companies, firing someone for low performance is nigh on impossible, right? And you get this enormous blowback from your leader, not necessarily your leadership, but HR apparatus, right? That you're a bad guy for trying to pip somebody out or something like that often. It's clearly it's your fault, which, there's some point to that, right? There is a point that I hired this person, or I'm not coaching them to the right extent to make them successful. Those are questions you have to wrestle with. But one of the things, I think one of the motivations is God, I instinctually know this person's not getting it done. I can make the judgment that this person's not getting it done. Proving it is very hard, right? Proving it to a degree that is acceptable, that will get me past the HR and legal risk people, that will kind of meet the ethical standard. That can be really hard. So it's maybe if I have a tool that can say, they're not producing output, then I can just point to that and be like, I'm good. I do think that is part of the motivation for those types of tools, right? And so, and I don't like that part. I get it. I fully empathize with it, but I also think that managers should take more ownership, right? And sort of push through it.
Well, that's where some of these tools can help managers too, is not looking at the measuring output aside. That's just a symptom of something. But if the managers are looking at their team and say, okay, they're underperforming, they could even run through some advice of a very tried and true method, using a model to say, what am I doing? Here's my scenario. Here's my team. Here's, what I'm thinking. And so then some of these new managers, or those managers who want to get better, could use these models to help critique themselves of, what am I doing wrong? It's that extreme ownership of, well, it's easy to say my team is underperforming, but as we know, there are no bad teams. There's only bad leaders. I love that line, but that's true though. And so these models could help them reflect if they choose to reflect in a way of, I'm doing something wrong. My team isn't performing, which means I'm not performing. What are some options that I can think through as a manager? But I've done that.
Well, how do you get specific, right?
Right.
Like being specific is hard sometimes with these because something, the outcome's not what you want, but you can't just be like, you're not good enough, right? Like you can't do that. You have to give some people like real tangible things to try to help them get better. Because again, like your goal should be to treat them like, like your little brother or little sister, right? Like if you're you could take a more paternalistic, view as well. But like if you're in charge of someone, they're your responsibility, right? Like they're not just a resource on a spreadsheet. Even though obviously there are corporate structures that try to reduce that. And that's where like you get some of these offshoring and outsourcing type of things are to allow you to treat people more that way. And so with the exception, leaving that stuff aside, you should be invested in their success. And so, back to the ethics of using these tools to help your management, it really gets down to why and what's your, to use kind of a squishy term, like what's your heart in it, right? Like, are you trying to help everybody be the best version of themselves as an engineer or as a worker or a person? Or are you just trying to check a box so everybody's working hard, right? Like that's, I think you have to really check yourself. And we talk about this a lot, right? Like we're building tools that, could be abused, right? By management and leadership. And so we try to put things into the tool that help prevent that, right? Like that help shape their thinking. But sometimes we've not put stuff in, right? Like we've not put stuff in because we're like, I don't trust the leaders to not abuse this, so we're just not going to put this in. We're going to turn this off.
Well, we had a debate pretty in depth when we were first starting off of, who are we serving here? Are we serving the executives, or do we want to empower the developers? And we took a stance on that we don't want to alienate the developers so that they don't want to use this because they're afraid of what's going to happen.
Yeah. So, and that's tough. And we try to strike that balance every day, right? Like, one of the core hypotheses I think that we have in our business is that one of the great deficits in, corporate IT, even though I hate that term, is leadership, right? Like it's, and so we want to help the engineers by helping their leaders be better in a lot of ways, right? But in a way, to your point, that doesn't alienate the engineer, right? That's still friendly to the engineer. And our way of being friendly to the engineer might be helping their boss be able to push on them in the right places, right? And so,
yes.
Trying to figure out what that looks like. But it consumes a lot of cycles, right? For us to think through that, and we care about that pretty deeply, and trying to be as useful as possible and still stay aligned to those principles is it's not trivial.
Yeah, we were developers. We slung code full time.
Some might say still are.
Yeah, but that's actually what I see as some of the benefits of this is we got into technology for a reason. I never stopped coding even when I got into management. I would always, not because I was also, working on DevGrid, but also I just love it. So these tools have actually enabled managers to be more effective at the things that they don't like, the things that maybe are just time consuming for them, so they can stay more connected to what drives their passions. And so keeping everybody deeply involved and engaged with why they got in here in the first place is going to just make their entire organization, their entire team better by way of automating the things that consume the most cycles. We found it. There's certain things that we don't love doing, but now we're able to automate that more now. The things that we'd have to get on a call and debate for an hour, well, just, okay, we're going to throw it into a model and just get some quick iterative results back, and we can make decisions faster. And that's really the value of this, is making decisions faster.
Yeah. Well, and you make a good point about it empowering leaders. Like, I'll say for myself, obviously I wear a lot of hats. I still want to code. I still think it's important, not just to help the product, but also, I had about a 3-year time period in my career where I wasn't writing code really regularly, and I didn't like it. Like, I could see a stagnation in my thinking. I used to tell a joke that I can always tell I can always tell when a leader stopped writing code, right? Because it's like your thinking calcifies in that time frame. It always reminds me of the joke from what is it, from Seinfeld. It's like one of his little stand-up bits during the show. He's talking about how you can always tell, what the best year of an older man's life was because his sense of style freezes in time that year. He's like, my dad must have had a great time in 1972 because he still dresses like he's in 1972 or something like that. And I mean, like, you could definitely, like, I could see that. Like, I used to, I shouldn't say this because now people might remember it and realize that I was doing that to them. But I used to test this with like really senior execs because I would make an assumption in my head after getting to know them a little bit. Like, I bet you this person hasn't really pushed any code since like 2006 or 2012 or whatever, because of the way they were thinking about things in their paradigms. And I mean, I usually had about a plus or minus of like 2 years. Like, I could really get pretty close. And the weirdness of, I mean, it makes sense though, right? Because if you think about it, like, if you're somebody that came up writing COBOL and that was your paradigm, like, you're not going to conceptualize serverless the right way, right? Like, it's going to be, I mean, not that you can't, it's not that you're stuck, but it's harder. And so that's why
you have to be intentional about learning it though. But that's why you have to be intentional. Either you're hands-on writing or you're doing the work to understand the modern approaches to things. Totally. One or the other have to happen.
Absolutely. And then the other point I was going to make is, like, to build on something you said, which is that the tools make it way easier for leaders. Like for someone like myself, I can jump into code after not having coded for a week and do something useful in an hour and a half or 2 hours in a way that I never could have done prior to the AI tools, right? Because like you got to get your brain around it. You're like, if you're not using it every day, sometimes the syntax and the rule, like all that, like just all the little nitpicky things that you have to kind of stay on top of. I don't really have to stay on top of the same way because I can just let the bot do it for me because it remembers the details. Now, obviously, I got to pay attention and understand the structure, but and then also being able to float between languages, like, that's a really cool thing, right? Like, I think we talked about this before, but like we started moving some of our ETL into Python instead of it being in TypeScript, which is what I was most comfortable with. And I fought it kicking and screaming, of course, because why not? Python is ugly and I hate it, but
at least it's not Java.
Yeah, well, this touche. But because of the tools, it really wasn't that big a deal because, like, ultimately, like, I can kind of read what's happening and I can ask the bot, what does this do? Or, hey, if I wanted to do this thing if I was going to do this in TypeScript, what's the right way to do it in Python? And like all that type of stuff you can just do really fast. And also, like, shell scripts. Like, I'm writing way more complicated shell scripts than I ever would have probably written before. And so it eliminates entire steps that I would have had to do otherwise. And so things like that are awesome. And I encourage every technology leader I talk to, I encourage them to keep coding. You still need to average, close to 10% of your time, as close to 10% of your time as you can. Even as a CEO, if you're a technologist, you should be writing code and code that will actually get used, not just like little, like, play around code. I think
in your opinion, what level does that stop though? Because let's just think of a bank, a CTO of a bank. How could they then code something at that scale?
I mean, I don't think it should stop. I think, I've had, again, won't name names, but like, I mean, I've said this to CIOs and things like that. And I was like, well, why aren't you coding it? Why aren't you coding? And some of them are like, and that's really cool. Like, I don't think it stops. Now, whether or not they can ship something, if I'm the CIO of a bank, am I going to ship something that's going to update the banking core? Probably not. Right. Like,
it definitely shouldn't.
Yeah. Because you're just not going to get into the context enough. But, maybe there's something in your workflow that's annoying you, or maybe there's something, you don't know. Like, if you're a technology leader, like, maybe if you're the CEO of a bank, you're probably not a technologist. So, like, fine. But if you're the most senior technologist at a bank, even something that's like that, you've got a bunch of technologists working for you. If you're not a technologist anymore because you're not actually writing code or in the tools, you don't know what your troops are doing, right? And
You've
so
got a lot of spreadsheets that you could optimize. You've got a lot of spreadsheets
Totally.
with money that you could then load into a data model and start to analyze. So there's a lot of opportunity if looked at the right way.
And yes, there's a lot of opportunities, and also like know your stack, like know what the tools that the team is using, so you can actually see it. Because so when they come to you and ask for $5 million to renew XYZ product, whether it's GitHub or GitLab or whatever it is, like you actually have some skin in it and you actually know what's going on. It's not a huge time investment. I'm talking about like 3-4 hours a week. Like it doesn't even need to be that much more. And it could be, and there's different ways to do it. Like to your point, like I most of the code I write is not on our product, right? Like it's things like we're a G Suite shop, a Google Workspace shop, not Office 365, and most of those people are Office 365. So God bless them, they're fighting the fight. But with like G Suite, like I automate so much of the admin of running a company, right? Like stupid, like silly things, like a receipt comes in, right? I have a bunch of rules and filters and all these different things set up to like, oh, there's a PDF attached to this. It's got some sort of term like invoice or receipt or whatever that gets tagged, and then have a script that then grabs it and sticks it in a Google Drive that the accountants can get access to. And I don't ever have to touch it, right? Like it gets recorded automatically. I don't even have to look at it or touch it or anything. It just goes. It's a silly one. There are other ones as well where that type of stuff, as a technologist, you should always be doing those types of things. And unfortunately, as you get to those senior levels at a place like a bank, you've got like EAs and things like that to offload things to, which is fine. Like God bless them, but you're not, if your fingernails aren't getting dirty, you don't actually know what the dirt feels like.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
No, I agree.
We got off track.
I agree. No, I think we're on track though. I think it's right on track with. It reinforces that some of these tools, these models can help those individuals not only get up to speed with the tech stack that their team is using, but also perform a task that could automate their job function. Yeah, they're not going to be experts in the code, maybe. I think they should still be pretty strong experts in code, but I think that can help people make better decisions about their role, their team, by getting their hands dirty, by using these models to like, hey, I haven't touched something in 6 months. I need to know the latest and greatest. I need to run this script and then start to learn it. But that's a mechanism that these individuals could use to get up to speed, to keep their skills sharp, to be able to automate the painful things in their own role by looking at it in the way that I don't know how to code anymore. You don't need to as much. Use a model, learn again.
It's interesting. Absolutely. You just reminded me of another story where this exact thing happened. So there's the CIO that I didn't work for, but he was at a company I was at. And this was like when ChatGPT and those things started to hit. And this guy he's an interesting guy, kind of old school, had been with the company prior to like a merger that had happened. Like he basically been in the same job since college, and he was late 50s probably. And rose up through the ranks steadily. Now he's the boss, and he's kind of a cantankerous guy. One of my faves. I liked him. He was a good dude, but he seemed extreme. He was one of those guys that kind of like seemed extremely set in his ways. And hadn't coded in 20 years, but was running, big technology organization that was kind of the, if not the accurate representation, at least the stereotypical representation of him. And he got so excited by all the AI stuff. Like he just got into it and it totally rejuvenated him. And he was starting to code things again. And it was like, because of how easy it was, to my point before, like he could take 30 minutes and like do something interesting and learn something. Whereas before it's like, all right, well, I got to dedicate a 4-hour block of time to even like get my environment set up and so he was doing data science stuff and he was all over the place. So again, I think I'm just reinforcing what you said, which is it lowers the barrier to entry, even, especially for people that understand technology, but don't necessarily understand the current tools, right? Like they're maybe outdated. That the AI bridges that gap very quickly. And
you can multitask on these things. Set the agent off to do something. Go take a call. Come back when you can. It's that deep focus doesn't need to be there anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really cool. So let's pivot a little bit on a conversation to kind of set it up, right? Conversation we started having this week. We're like, man, we're starting to use these agents a lot. And we're making sure we're in SOX compliance and all that type of stuff. And we started having a conversation about like, okay, if a bot writes all the code, because like you set the stage, right? Like the basic rule of all of these compliance frameworks and regulations and all these different things is there's a separation of concerns question where basically the person that writes the code should not be able to get it into production, right? Like there needs to be a check and review where someone else is essentially pressing the button to let it go.
No single person can release anything into a production environment. That's a hard line in the sand for these audits.
Yeah, and then that's the principle behind the rule, like how the rules actually get written changes from framework to framework and all those different things. But that's the fundamental point, right? You don't want a rogue actor to be able to go push code into production, right? Whether it's maliciously or just irresponsibly. And so, and that's kind of the basic rule. Now, and again, there's exceptions for like incidents and there's all that type of stuff, but that's the basic frame. And so we started, it's like, oh, okay. Well, what if an agent goes and writes code completely asynchronously, can just one person approve that? Like, do we treat the agent as a person, right? Like, is it like, for example, if I have a security tool scanning my repo on a schedule overnight, and then they find a defect in the code, and then my bot says, boop, 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 okay, I'm going to go fix that defect, and then submits a pull request. Who can approve it? Can one person approve it? Can one of the code owners approve it? Or do you now need two? Because theoretically, there's only one person pushing it to production because there was no other person involved. Now, the other tools are trying to get are sort of solving this by, like GitHub is solving this by, right? Like if I wrote the ticket and assigned Copilot to it, I'm also getting tagged to those commits effectively, right? So I own those commits, so I can't approve it, right? Is that how it's working?
Yeah, that's how it's working now. And I like that they're doing it that way. I think that's the right approach to it because you gave the instructions, just like you give the instructions to yourself to write the code. I mean, that's so your brainchild.
What if I write the ticket and then one of our devs or a PO or somebody like that assigns Copilot to it? Who is it? Is it my tick? Am I the co-author of the code, or is the person that assigned
it should be the dev that assigned it? Because I am deferring my responsibility to write this code over to the bot, but it's still my responsibility to write it. I'm going to approve it, but somebody else has to approve, quote unquote, my implementation because the dev would be the one giving the instructions. You can't just assign ticket. The bot does all the work and it's perfect. There's still some, other further instructions that need to happen to get to that point. So I still think it belongs to the developer is still deferring their responsibility to the bot. So another human would have to approve it. That would be my opinion of where it's going to go.
Yeah. So what about, and obviously we're speculating because the rules haven't caught up to all this. So we'll say that for the record, don't use us for SOC compliance advice. There's people that actually do that for a living, that know a lot more about it than we do. But having worked in the banks and stuff, we spent a lot of time having these sort of debates with the people that write these policies and whatnot. So I find it interesting. And actually, I was texting with a friend who I used to work with, who before he was like the senior technology risk guy at a bank, he also worked at the FRB as an examiner. So he eats this stuff up like for like cornflakes. But I mean, his point was similar to what we're saying is essentially you just still have to maintain that same rule, right? Now, and the one that's interesting to me though, because GitHub is essentially forcing ownership of the code away from an individual or away from the bot to an individual is sort of their answer to that, which is smart. The question I have is like when you get into a situation where it is truly like agentic, right? Like it is responding to stimulus or a schedule and then coming up with it, and there's no human in the loop until the pull request, right? And so if that's the moment, do you still need two people? That's the question I have. Well,
there's still potential issues that could happen with the code, right? There's still, hypothetically, a bad actor comes in and says, I'm going to write this to instruct the agent to put something malicious in a workflow. And it does, and it puts some malicious code. And now you've got significant defect, honeypot, whatever the case may be. It's now in production, but a single person approved that. It doesn't matter if they wrote it or not, they gave the instructions to do that. Or it could be a hallucination in the model that accidentally, put something, I don't want to say malicious, but it's not safe. That could, in this way, get approved by a single person and into production. Whereas the two-person approver, I can't say it eliminates it because we see what happens in production today, but it seriously reduces the chance of something malicious or nefarious or grossly incorrect into production.
So if I'm interpreting this right, what we're saying is if it's truly asynchronous and there was no human instigator or initiator, then you need two people to look at it.
Yes.
That would be our internal rule,
yes.
Which will keep us clean from a standpoint. It's like, because otherwise, to your point, you're not. The whole point is to have the person who wrote the code not be the one who approves it. Is the spirit of the rule, because you don't. But at the same time, like the other byproduct of that is that you have two people looking at it, right? And two people like assessing it. And so if you only have one, then that's much more limited and stuff. So interesting. Yeah, I think that to me makes sense. I mean, and of course the funniest thing is as time goes on, the best code reviewers are going to beat the bots by far, right? Like, and then they're going to review each other, and you're going to have like 6 different reviewers that are looking at different things, and it'll be wild. But I think that's interesting. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for everybody for sticking around. Hopefully this was interesting, and we'll talk to you guys all again soon.
That's a wrap for this episode of Tech Council, brought to you by DevGrid. Thanks for joining us as we dive into building smarter solutions for the enterprise. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, leave us a rating, and share your thoughts on X, at DevGrid Inc., or at devgrid.io. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll explore more ways to thrive in the enterprise. Until then, keep building.